So thank you so much for that introduction, and what a great turnout. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here. So I want to talk to you. I know my tagline is an app a day, and obviously technology is part of the problem, so I want to offer it up as part of the solution. But we're not only going to talk about apps. I'm going to talk about some of my experience in Silicon Valley, treating kind of highly stressed, highly productive employees, and really the types of issues and conditions that they're facing. And hopefully by the end of the talk, we'll really have some practical strategies that have helped me personally and helped the patients and clients that I work with. So with my own life, one of the things that I've come to realize is, most of us would like to be sort of centered. So I kind of think of my life as being a pendulum. It swings back and forth between my personal responsibilities, whether it's my individual responsibilities, the family responsibilities. With my work, I've got a very busy day job. I've also got a hobby job where I like to blog, I like to write. So every day I'm kind of oscillating between these sides. I'm sure a lot of you in the audience feel like Gumby. You're in 10 different directions. And I think in the beginning when I sort of took on these goals of fulfilling these responsibilities, I felt like I've always got to be in the center, and I shouldn't be shifting so much in terms of my mind and emotions. But now I'm realizing that it's more important for me to really feel, what does it feel like to feel centered? And then when I do deviate, how do I bring myself back in the middle? So today I'll talk about some of the experiences I've gone through. I'm very excited to be presenting with Mark, who's been in this field for a big part of his career. So I think you're going to have some real great content to take back with you. So one of the things that I point out to my Silicon Valley clients is sort of the difference. A lot of people come to me for nutrition and exercise advice, and I do have this culturally tailored practice where I see a lot of people from the Asian subcontinent, from India and China, and many even tell me, wait, Dr. Sinha, are you telling me not to eat rice? Why can't I eat starches like my grandparents did? So I kind of put up this slide here to really illustrate the fact that although we came to this country with a lot of traditions, our lifestyles have really dramatically changed. When you look at a typical rickshaw puller, and I like to focus on rickshaw pullers because I used to go to Calcutta every summer, and that's when they really had the human-pulled rickshaws, and I was fascinated by these rickshaw pullers. And really, if you see how many miles they run on an average basis, they're running between 40 to 50,000 steps per day. My average engineers that sit at their desks, I know this because I measure steps like a vital sign, they walk about 2,000 to 3,000 steps per day. So the rickshaw pullers are at least 20 times more active. They've obviously got a strong leg and core. In India, we're combating obesity right now, so these rickshaw pullers are pulling obese families around all day. So they have to have a strong leg and core to do that, whereas our engineers that sit at the chair all day, they obviously have no leg and core strength compared to a rickshaw puller. Normal vitamin D. Vitamin D is a powerful hormone that actually helps lower inflammation, and we'll talk about vitamin D a little bit at the end. And they're getting plenty of sunshine. Their skins are usually exposed. Many rickshaw pullers are shirtless or they wear a tank top, so we don't need to check their vitamin D levels. We know they've got optimal vitamin D from sunshine, whereas we have rash, severe vitamin D deficiency in our Silicon Valley employees. So for someone like that, on the left, the rickshaw puller, lots of rice and starches is okay, and not just okay, it's necessary to fuel those active muscles so they can get through an entire workday. But for someone who's on this side, and they're both from South Asia, obviously lots of rice can lead to issues like metabolic syndrome and diabetes and heart disease. So that's why I'm not telling my engineers to quit their job and pull rickshaws down the 101, but we do have to find some sort of common middle ground where we incorporate some of these ancestral practices in practical ways. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's start off and talk about exercise, okay? So what is the most challenging exercise to prescribe in my Silicon Valley individuals, my type A Silicon Valley individuals? Can anybody guess? This is great. Some of you watched my last talk, didn't you? Because nobody guessed that before, but you're absolutely right. It is walking. And I got to tell you, after being sort of a type A athlete for a long time, I thought walking was for old people. I'm going to say it right now. I didn't think walking was a respectable act. But now that I see patients in the clinic, and I see the opposite effects, that when people over-exercise, they can burn out their adrenals, they can become injured recurrently, and I'm starting to appreciate really the power of walking. It is an anti-inflammatory exercise. When you exercise at a very high level without resting your body can generate a lot of free radicals and oxidative byproducts. But walking is a great way to actually keep your body active while keeping inflammation levels down. So inflammation is when your immune system is extremely active. It backfires and can cause all types of chronic health conditions. It spares the adrenal glands and the SNS, which is the sympathetic nervous system, the stress activation part of your nervous system. It spares hunger and injury. So a lot of people that work out very hard, my New Year's resolution patients that are working out really hard find that they're hungry all the time as well too, so they can't stick to their dietary requirements when they're over-exercising. Walking, fortunately, doesn't trigger intense hunger like that, and it has been around longer than burpees, right? So we know our ancestors thrived by walking thousands and thousands of steps. We don't need to do all these intense, complicated type aerobic or resistance training exercises to achieve optimal health. So, one of the things I recommend, and most of us nowadays are wearing one of these types of devices that track steps. But it's interesting because although a lot of early adopters were using this, when I see patients now, many of them are actually not using their Fitbit, or it's more like a fashion bracelet where they don't even check their steps anymore. But I remind them that, dust off that activity monitor. And a couple of tips I give them is if you do have a newer generation device, tracking hourly steps is a good idea because many of my patients try to get in all their steps in the morning and evening, but you do want to stay regularly physically active because every 20 to 30 minutes, your body does produce a hormone called lipoprotein lipase, which stores more fat. It can raise triglycerides. We want to make sure we interrupt the prolonged sitting. So even if you don't track hourly steps, I often tell my patients, do a lunchtime check. You should have about 4,000 steps under your belt. So that makes it a little bit easier because if you can focus on that, you're not left with a debt of like 8,000 steps by the end of the day. 8,000, 8 to 10,000 is pretty optimal. Again, my average engineer that's walking 2,000 steps, I'm not going to tell him to walk 10,000. That's not going to happen. So we try to increase by 1,000, 2,000 every week. So really try to dust that off and really get those walking steps in. It does make a profound difference in health. So resistance training. So when I used to go to Calcutta in the summer, it's hard enough that this guy's got to pull people around on a rickshaw, but then in the monsoon rains, you add this additional level of resistance, which is ridiculous, right? So this is the next section, which is actually resistance training. So when it comes to resistance training, first I like to teach my patients just to do some fundamental basic body weight exercises. So nowadays there's so many great YouTube videos that you can watch to really perfect your form. But this particular company, Runtastic, they make some great apps based on the accelerometer in your phone. So typically for a lot of my patients that are engineers, they're sitting all day, they're really sedentary. I can already tell by examining them that their core is really deconditioned. I might have them download the Runtastic squats, the push-ups, and the pull-up apps. And the nice thing about these apps is it works off the accelerometer in your phone. So when you're doing squats, you hold the phone and you basically do the squats. It'll count how many squats you're doing, okay? And then a lot of my patients, they start off and they see me in a couple of months, they start off and they can only do 20 or 30, but then this reminds them every couple of days to do this, and they get up to 50 or 100. And we see their metabolic numbers improve because when their leg and core get stronger, their body can metabolize triglycerides and sugar more effectively. We can reverse metabolic syndrome while they're doing this in addition to making the dietary changes. The push-up app, you put the push-up on the, you put the phone on the ground, and you do push-ups over the phone. So basically, it'll track how many push-ups you're doing. For the pull-ups, you can put the phone in your pocket. It uses accelerometer. So if people are at a high level and they're able to do pull-ups, we do this. So I really measure this like vital signs to make sure patients are getting stronger. Yes, I've got the smart aleck patients who download the squat app and they're like, look, Dr. Sinha, here are my squats right here. So you can game the system obviously and fake your numbers, but most people get very motivated to do these sorts of things. And really, we do see biometric results that show significant improvements. Okay? So rickshaw pullers, when they load passengers onto their rickshaw, they have to basically squat down and they have to deadlift the passengers up, right? So a deadlift position is basically when you bend over and you straighten your body up. And a deadlift is, out of all the weightlifting exercises out there, it's probably the best total body exercise you can do. You get significant pulses in growth hormone, which makes you retain more muscle and testosterone. It uses all the major muscle groups. And the nice thing about it, too, is it actually works on a lot of the posture muscles. One of the things we see a lot in our modern workforce is a slumped forward position, which a lot of young kids are even developing. So when you learn to sort of deadlift properly, you don't have to use a lot of weight. You can even use 2 dumbbells and just really get in the habit of lifting your shoulders up like this. You're working all the right muscles. And in addition to this is very practical for as we age because, this is how we lift suitcases. This is how we lift our groceries, right? So it's a practical motion that you can incorporate into everyday life rather than a lot of complex type movements that a trainer might try to teach you, which do have some value, but they don't translate into sort of our active daily life. Now, if you're not familiar with Tabata or high-intensity interval training, this is something you really need to incorporate into your busy days. So Tabata was the original exercise physiologist that really popularized this, and this is basically any sort of exercise that you can do at a fast pace and then at a slow pace. So for athletes, obviously, you get up to maximal heart rate, you go as fast as you can, and then you slow down to a slow pace for a given period of time. So the typical Tabata routine is when you download this app, there's a lot of Tabata apps out there. If you're on an exercise cycle or on an elliptical machine, you go for 20 seconds as hard as you can, and then you slow down for 10 seconds or stop. You go 20 seconds, 10 seconds. So there's 30-second intervals. You do it 8 times, and it turns out to be 4 minutes. So doing 4 minutes of a Tabata exercise is equivalent to doing about 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes, continuous steady state on the treadmill in terms of heart health. So doing a few sets of this can be a powerful way to really improve health. The thing about high intensity also is it is more significant in boosting growth hormone production. We talked about growth hormone retaining muscle. It's an anti-aging hormone. And for some people, if you can't do high intensity Tabata, there was a study that came out that showed that even doing interval training in walking, so doing slow walking, fast walking, slow walking, fast walking, this is a study that was in Denmark, and it showed significant reductions in visceral body fat and glucose levels in type 2 diabetics. So you don't have to be doing the full out sprints. If all you can tolerate is just walking fast and then slowing down, you can still gain a lot of the benefits of doing high intensity interval training at a slightly lower, more tolerable intensity. So really, really great thing to incorporate into your life. Okay, so I already told you that we're not going to turn all our engineers into rickshaw pullers, but we do have to find a way where we can spend a significant part of our workday getting work done while we're active. So this is a picture of me right here. I'm on an old elliptical machine in our den, and I actually used an old resistance band and strapped a laptop to my elliptical machine, and I wrote over half of my book on an elliptical machine. Because I was like, if I'm going to write a book on health and I'm going to gain 20 pounds of fat and lecture about this, it's not going to give me much credibility, right? So then this is what I do. So for a lot of my work that's passive, like for example, if I'm looking through emails, etc., I do it on the elliptical. Now I have a treadmill, so I have basically, it's strapped to my treadmill, and so I'll do that. But you know, a lot of folks are basically using these tread desks now where you've got the treadmill platform underneath the desk. You know, even on the exercise cycle, I might sometimes put the iPad on there while I'm scanning through emails. You know, there is some focus work that I need to do where I can't be on the elliptical. I've got to sit down and sort of do that more methodically. But I think one of the resolutions you can make is how do I really transform my workspace into more of an active environment? Standing work desks, whatever you can do to interrupt prolonged sitting and get these walking steps in. And really, I mean, I didn't just do this to prove a point. I was so much more productive. I could write pages after pages after pages when I was on the elliptical. If I was sitting and trying to write the same thing, the content would have been different. I definitely would not have been as productive. So see if these are some things that you can apply. And these are great core balls for sitting on. For posture improvement is another great technique as well. Okay? So when is your next workout? This is a real key thing. So one of the most common things I see is people are over-exercising without adequate rest. And the most important thing I can tell you is when you do intense exercise that engages your muscles, you need at least a few days to recover from that. And many of my patients that are working in big companies, often they sign up for the boot camps or they've got a personal trainer and they're seeing the trainer 4 or 5 days a week. They're doing intense 60 to 90-minute workouts. They're maybe doing P90X or some sort of a high-intensity protocol, and they feel like to achieve success, they need to feel sore every single day. That is no way to live, and you don't actually get improvement from that. So when is your next workout? When you actually have little to no soreness. So usually when I train, I do one intense total body day of full weight training. This is what I recommend to my patients, and I allow 7 to 10 days to recover, actually. That works very efficiently for me, and you need at least that amount of time for muscle growth to occur. So really growth and strength improvements happen during the rest phase, not during the actual exercise phase. When mobility is restored, so in the in-between days, I might do yoga, I'm in the office, I'm constantly stretching my hips and my hamstrings out. So again, making my workspace an active space. When HRV is in check, we'll talk about heart rate variability. It's a great metric for stress reduction, but also HRV tells you when your parasympathetic system, the relaxation system, is actually working properly. So a lot of elite athletes will use heart rate variability when they wake up in the morning to decide, is today a training day or is it not a training day? Because if you're very scheduled with your workouts, like Monday, no matter what, that's my boot camp day. But what happens if Sunday night was not a good night? What happens if you got 6 hours of sleep and you wake up exhausted? Is boot camp, does that make sense that day? If you were to measure your HRV, it would tell you that you're probably not in shape, but intuitively, you should be able to tell when's a good time to work out and when's a good time to recover. And most of us don't have these mechanical days where predictably every Monday we're ready to do a 90-minute boot camp, okay? So err on the side of over-resting, and when I say over-resting, not over-sitting, over-resting meaning doing stretching, some meditation, some walking, some light activity after hard workouts, you can recover, and you will not diminish gains. You will see more gains when you allow your body to recover from those types of workouts. Okay? So really, the kind of thing that I really teach my patients is a lot of the systems that we have in place were really designed for our primal ancestors, our hunter-gatherers, and now these have become maladapted in our sedentary workforce. And what I mean by that is, for example, when a hunter-gatherer basically is in battle and if they become injured, their blood vessels constrict, and that's a way so they won't bleed to death, all right? So if you get a cut and you're out in the wild, you want your blood vessels to constrict. So that's something that promotes survival. But unfortunately, in a sedentary worker who's under chronic stress, those blood vessels constrict, and that can predispose them to high blood pressure. In the case of blood sugar, when you're out in the wild, you need cortisol and stress to raise blood sugar so you have energy. But if that's happening on a persistent chronic level, that can lead to insulin resistance, prediabetes, and diabetes. Now, belly fat, how can that be adaptive? Belly fat is adaptive if you're living in a feast-famine society, because during times of famine, the belly fat is your Tupperware. You access calories in that Tupperware so you can survive. But unfortunately now, we don't empty our Tupperware. We just keep filling it, right? Wintertime is not famine. We just keep filling that Tupperware, and now we've got central obesity and all the other issues that come up with that. Pulse and breathing makes sense. You're breathing fast so you can basically, deliver oxygen to your muscles so you can fight. But interesting, a lot of my patients that see me in the clinic, they often think that they have asthma or some breathing disorder. They ask me to order pulmonary function tests. And the issue is that because of their chronic stress, they're not breathing properly. They're suffocating. They're breathing up here. And, it's interesting because sometimes when I give stress lectures and we do some deep breathing exercises, which I think Mark will guide us through, people don't know how to breathe properly anymore. So it's really coming, something that can deliver oxygen and help us provide energy to the body is now translated into hyperventilation, improper breathing, panic, palpitations, these types of things. And lastly, muscle tension. Muscle tension is protective. If somebody's about to deliver a blow to your stomach, you want to tighten those muscles to protect your inner organs. But if you're sitting constantly in a stressed out mode, you develop all types of muscle spasms in your forearms, in your neck, carpal tunnel, all these chronic musculoskeletal issues. So many of my patients who do yoga and they're doing a lot of range of motion exercises, if they're spending most of their day sitting in a very stiff, tense position, they're not going to achieve full recovery. So we have to be mindful of how we sit, how we breathe during our workspace, because otherwise we do end up facing a lot of these maladaptive patterns. Okay, so more on heart rate variability. So heart rate variability, or HRV, is different than just checking your pulse. So basically what these monitors do, so before we had phones and apps to do this, you would actually have to use more advanced equipment to measure heart rate variability. So typically our heartbeat, it doesn't beat like a metronome, right? So a lot of people expect that a healthy heart will beat like a metronome. Boom, 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 boom. But there's actually intrinsic subtle variability between the heartbeats. And when you've got variability, that's a sign that your parasympathetic system is active, your relaxation mechanism. So when people have high heart rate variability, it means their relaxation system is in place. And the cool thing is now you can use your phone to actually monitor HRV, or heart rate variability. Okay? So this can be a guide. Like I said, a lot of athletes use this to figure out training days, but really for stress management, this has been a game changer for a lot of my patients, because many of them, they need objective data back. They're not going to just believe, okay, mindfulness is going to help you. They want to see some objective data, and HRV is a great way to get them there. So there's a lot of tools that you can use. I actually did a couple of blog posts on HRV, and I did a test YouTube video on how I use some of the HRV tools, so you can check that out. But transitioning to chronic stress, one of the things that I talk about a lot in lectures is this entity I call chronic entrepreneur syndrome. I see a lot of C-level executives in my practice, and interestingly, I've been seeing a pattern where some of them, you look at their body type and they're normal to very fit, they're exercising very vigorously. When you look at their labs, often their labs are mildly abnormal. They're the type of labs where their doc says, your numbers look good, your cholesterol, blood sugar's fine. Their work output, they're clearly very successful, they're insanely productive, they're building and selling companies like no one's business. Fitness-wise, they're at a very high level of aerobic conditioning. Stress levels are really high, but that's become their norm, right? Hyperactive feels normal to these executives, and sleep becomes compromised, but it's ignored because of success in all these areas. I'm seeing a lot of these types of patients develop their first heart attack in their 30s and 40s. No family history at all, because they have a chronically accelerated nervous system. And this really was what connected the dots. I read about the effects of stress on the body. I learned about it in medical school. But when I started seeing more and more of these execs coming in who really look like this guy, numbers not that abnormal, and they're having chronic health conditions like heart disease, first generation in early age, that was really a motivator for me to really transmit this message and really make that a top priority in my health. So that's why I'm very excited about really having Mark here today and having us really make this a priority. A lot of us have the priority at New Year's, eat healthier, lose 20 pounds, exercise more, but this is really it has to really bubble to the surface in terms of our health priorities. Okay? Coming back to sunlight, so speaking of apps, I mentioned that vitamin D deficiency is a major issue. And the thing with vitamin D is it's not just a bone-building hormone. You know, it's actually not just a bone-building vitamin. It is actually a powerful hormone that can lower inflammation in the body. It can make your muscles more insulin sensitive, so it burns more sugar and triglycerides. It can lower chronic disease risk. There's all types of benefits. And sometimes my patients get a little confused on how much vitamin D they should be taking. So this app called D-Minder is something that I've used with my patients. It's a very cool app. When you download it, you input the data that you need to determine sort of how much sunlight you should be getting. Because really how much vitamin D I need is different than what you need based on my skin type, you know, how much body fat I have. So basically in the app you put in, it'll take a picture of your photo, or I think it might have a reference diagram. So you punch in your skin type, your skin tone, what location you live in, because that is dependent on how much sunlight you're exposed to. You put in your weight and BMI, because people that have more body fat, they actually need higher doses of vitamin D. You put in your existing vitamin D level, and then it will basically tell you when you're out in the sun in real time how much vitamin D you're getting, and it might make a recommendation for supplementation. So really cool app here. I definitely see improvements in metabolic numbers when people's vitamin D levels are optimized. We try to focus on getting it naturally through sunlight, but obviously with our day jobs, you know, it's not easy to get you up to normal levels through that. Dietary-wise, obviously, you can get some vitamin D as well, too, but many of my patients with really low levels do need some level of strategic supplementation. Okay? Now, managing stress, so some of the apps that I've used with patients and that I've used for myself as well. So one thing I mentioned too is we talked about heart rate variability. Resting heart rate can sometimes be a very rough surrogate marker. So if you know, like I know based on my heart rate, that usually when I'm sort of in my zen, relaxed mode, I'm usually running in the 50s to 60s. When I'm a little bit more excitable, I'm up in the 80s to 90s. So using your resting heart rate using an Apple Watch or any sort of tool sometimes is useful. But do keep in mind that heart rate can vary based on a lot of metrics. When I started telling some of my friends this, or some of my patients, I realized that I made a bit of a mistake because people started calling me every time their heart rate went up to 85 or 90. You're like, what's wrong with me, Dr. Ron? I'm having a heart attack. So a lot of things can influence heart rate. But if you know sort of where your baseline zone is, this is a crude marker. But like I said, HRV is a better option. This app right here is made by a company called Saagara. It's called the Pranayama App, and it's a wonderful tool for regulating breathing. So this is the one that I've used with my kids. We sit down and you can set the sounds, you can set the breathing interval for inhalation and exhalation, and it's just got a very cool, easy usable interface to help teach people how to breathe properly. And then HRV-wise, there's a lot of great tools out there. There is a simple app on the phone that you can use as well too. It's made by a company called Azumio. It's called Stress Doctor. And basically, you can put your finger on the flash, and it actually does measure, in a crude way, your heart rate variability. And when you're in the right zone, it gives you these little yin-yang points, so you get some positive feedback. But one disclaimer I want to give you, because I've taught this to some patients, and when they measure HRV, if you're a type A, goal-oriented person, this is not going to go well for you guys. Because if you look at your phone and you're like, why am I not getting the yin-yang points? If you start even thinking like that, you're not going to get it. So you literally sometimes have to just close your eyes and not be goal-oriented for one time in your life and just breathe normally. And naturally, it starts happening. Same with the other HRV tools. It's very difficult for most of my patients. They won't be able to get that HRV until they learn to sort of let go and not be judgmental and just sort of be in the moment, which is a great way to do it. So I'd say for most of my patients, some sort of HRV tool is really useful. So it's something I'd recommend if you really haven't been able to incorporate these practices into your life. Okay, so I mentioned the sound app. This is a great one. So one thing is we know that stress is an issue for the entire family. So getting kids even together for a few minutes using some of these tools, if you can't just do a silent guided meditation, I think it's been really transformative for a lot of my families who are dealing with high levels of stress. Okay? Another thing that I've recently started using with patients, and I've kind of enjoyed using, is these auditory tones called binaural beats. And the way these basically work is you put your headphones on. So I put an example app that I really like using. And binaural beats are basically auditory tones that are delivered to each of your ears at a different frequency. And then the difference between those auditory tones is supposed to be aligned with higher brain states, which we call binaural beats. I've looked at a lot of studies on BNBs. There's a lot of conflicting evidence out there on it. But I got to say, at the very least, this UI is really great because there's wonderful sound tones, and the sounds are very relaxing. They've got some great music tracks in the background. So I have my kids doing, sometimes they'll put on the focus binaural beat when they're doing homework, or there's great sleep induction one. There's insomnia sounds, and it's a very reasonable app, but I'm just very impressed with the way it works. So one more thing to maybe try if you're having difficulty focusing or kind of slowing down your nervous system before going to bed at night. So those BNBs, Brainwave Studio is the name of the app on that one. Okay? So here's the metabolic evidence, okay? We've talked subjectively about a lot of these concepts, but this is a patient. I know we've got a lot of data up here. This is when I give metabolic syndrome or diabetes talks. I show people this person transformed their diet, their triglycerides, their healthy cholesterol got better. But for this talk, I want to focus on these numbers right here. In particular, the C-reactive protein. So this is a patient who had severe metabolic syndrome, very high risk for heart disease. So we made a lot of lifestyle changes. And C-reactive protein is actually a marker for inflammation. So you can see we normally want this number to be less than 3. His marker came back at 10.6, okay, which is very high risk, high levels of inflammation. Immune system working very actively can cause cancer, heart disease, all these conditions. We incorporated these lifestyle changes, and he dropped from 10.6 to 3.6. But I couldn't quite get him down to 0.6 through extra diet and exercise. There was one thing that got him to 0.6, and that was meditation. That's the only other variable that changed. So we incorporated mindfulness. He did meditation regularly through a program that I'd recommended, and he dropped down purely from 3.6 to 0.6. You don't always see this. People come up to me after the talk saying, how can I get this test done? There's some inflammation that's not measurable. There's improvements that can't be measured when you do mindfulness practices, but I've had enough patients really transformed by doing these sorts of things that it's really won me over in terms of how important it is as a part of a life strategy. Okay? So sleep. This slide really frustrates me because I sleep on a very expensive mattress in a temperature-controlled room. I've got, light-blocking shades, and this guy's sleeping on a rickshaw deeper than I probably slept in 5 years, okay? So I'm very jealous of this guy. But really, the point about sleep is, really to make the point, is people talk about sleep, and really to break down sleep objectively, is when your body is so physically tired that your mind can't even think at night, that's when you sleep the best, right? Regardless of anything. This guy, we talked about how active he is. So despite, it's not like he doesn't have emotional stress, right? He's living in an impoverished part of the world, and he's definitely got lots of stress, but his physical body's so tired that it overpowers that stress, and that's where physical activity is key. There's a lot of things to read about with sleep, but unless we keep our body physically active, unless we calm that mind down in the evening, getting that deep phase sleep is very difficult. So one way I measured this was by using a tool. This is the MyZeo sleep device. And unfortunately, I have not found a tool yet that works as well as this one, because the bad news is this company went out of business. They sold their technology to someone else, but I just want to make a point because I don't need to use the tool after it made the case for me. But what I liked about this tool, so basically it's this alarm clock device, and you wear this little strap on your forehead, and it actually measures your brain waves. So it can tell you not just the duration of sleep, because if you're wearing an Apple Watch or Fitbit, it can tell you based on the accelerometer how long you're sleeping, but this gives very accurate information about the depth of sleep. So this is a while back that I did this, but here's a typical day where I had no exercise, stress levels were high, I'm very alcohol sensitive, I had a glass of wine that evening. So another thing about wine is it's a great nightcap, but for a lot of people it can actually erode their deep phase sleep. But basically on that night, I got a total, I don't know if you can see this, of 6 hours and 40 minutes of sleep, and my deep phase sleep was about 1 hour and 5 minutes, okay? So comparing that to a day where I exercised at 3 p.m., warm bath, no alcohol, 8 hours and 14 minutes of sleep, and I doubled, right? So it was an hour here, I got 1 more hour of deep phase sleep. And if you get 10 more, 15 more minutes of deep phase sleep, you will feel like a new person. So again, getting back to the Rickshaw diagram, it isn't just a duration of sleep, it's doing things to calm our mind and keep our bodies physically active so our body can actually rest more deeply. And the reason we sleep deeper too is because when your body is tired, nighttime during deep phase sleep is when your body produces growth hormone to repair a body that's been active. If your body hasn't been active, if you're sitting at the computer all day, your body's saying, listen, there's nothing to repair. This guy's been sitting all day. Why do we need deep phase sleep? I'll just give him an 8-hour nap and then let him go on with the day, right? So that's how the body system really works. But it's really key to try to really achieve that adequate deep phase sleep. Okay? So really, what I'm excited about with partnering with Integrative Healing Center is basically that they treat these vital signs, walking steps, sleep duration, stress levels, just like I do in my practice. We look at those as being our modern day vital signs. It's not just pulse, blood pressure, the usual things that we look at. We have to start looking at walking steps. We have to look at these as vital signs because these are having a devastating impact on the patients that we see today. Right? So I'm very proud to say that nowadays in my practice, in my consult practice, I'm sending more patients to the app store and to the grocery store than to the drugstore, right? We need to prescribe things like apps for nutrition, for activity, for exercise, for meditation, for sunlight, whatever it takes. And this is really the direction medicine needs to go in if we're going to prevent and overcome these conditions without that drug-centric approach. Okay? And then I want to finish off with one more note about sort of slowing down, which, I have a problem with, if you can tell by the pace of my speaking here. But so what's the rush, okay? So hurry sickness is a major issue. Hurry sickness has been studied over and over, and it is an independent risk factor for heart disease. So many people who think of stress, they think of that sort of type A, angry type stress, but many of us are silent stressors that are constantly feeling under the gun. So ask yourself, how do you walk? How do you talk? How do you drive? How's your breathing? How are you eating? Are you eating in front of a computer and rushing through things? Does everything feel urgent? How often do you multitask? I put this elevator button up here because when we were in Mexico during winter break, we get into a hotel and I see somebody inside the hotel and literally the doors just start to shut and he's just pushing his floor over and over. How many times have people done that? Right? You just keep pushing it over. By the way, I've talked to people about this. It doesn't make the elevator go up to the floor faster, but it just shows the fact that we don't have any patience to wait for things. So any of these signs are signs that our nervous system is running at a very accelerated pace, and we consciously have to do things to slow down. And one thing I want to say about hurry sickness is if you want to practice mindfulness, if you're rushed all the time, you're going to make it very difficult for yourself. If you're trying to go on a diet and your pantry has junk food in it, it's very difficult to eat healthy. If you're overscheduled all the time, mindfulness becomes very challenging. So make it a little bit easier for yourself and try to loosen up your schedule. I'm a big fan of doing single tasking. So when I think of my day, I think of what can I do for my personal wellness. And when I say personal wellness, insulating yourself from digital and family distraction, even if you can get outside in nature for a few minutes, that's something you should have on a daily basis. For work, we know based on studies, multitasking is not productive, it is counterproductive. So can you shut off, focus on 1 or 2 tasks during the day, shut off the other emails, Facebook texts, and focus on that task. And then family, full attention, whatever we can do to really get families focused at the dinner table, etc., is going to be key. Okay? So what's been my best recent wellness investment? This guy right here. I'm not an animal person, but finally my kids forced me to get a dog, and me and my wife are not animal people at all. But I gotta say, it's been a life-changing transformation. More oxytocin, which is our bonding hormone, more vitamin D. We never used to use our backyard. Now we're out there 4 times a day, basically. More walking steps. You know about the microbiome and gut health, definitely improve with animal exposures. New social connections. All of a sudden, there's a world of people out there. I used to think dog owners were very annoying, but you guys are nice people. You guys are actually really nice people that I missed out on all these years. And now I'm meeting you guys. I'm like, wow, these dog owners are cool. So great social connection there. And lastly, I just want to finish with the fact that this Silicon Valley syndrome that I talk about often will blame the company, the place that we work at. It's my boss that's making me miserable. It's this job. I got to change companies. I got to start my own work. But really those seeds, they're planted very early in life. Okay? So it starts with these distorted belief systems, right? Like survival of the fittest, the relentless pursuit of perfection. Or my kids had this little slogan on their t-shirt for their cross-country team, never let good enough be enough, right? Maybe that's good for sports, but a lot of us have grown up in that environment where enough is never enough. And this is really what starts accelerating sort of that nervous system, right? Many of us have this distorted belief system where a higher education, great job, that'll lead to bliss. Maybe if I start my own company, that'll lead to bliss. Writing a book and starting a blog, I'll tell you firsthand, that did not lead to bliss for me, okay? So changing the paths is not going to get us to bliss. And a lot of us sort of expect that from our kids. Maybe they'll be able to follow this path, but really it can lead to a lot of issues. And I put up my picture of my brother here because I'm the traditional protocol. I followed my dad's footsteps into medicine, which is every Indian's parents' dream come true. My brother is wearing a white coat, a different type of white coat. He lives in Paris. He's married to a French woman. My dad almost disowned him when he decided to marry outside of an Indian, but it was a tough road. But really, he led his life with no protocol, and he really led a very fulfilling life. And I think sometimes we're so regimented with protocols for ourselves and our kids that we have to really be careful about that because it can lead to a lot of anguish later in life. And we're seeing a lot of this in kids. Kids are developing adult health conditions like obesity, type 2 diabetes. My wife's a pediatrician. She sees this all the time in kids now, really adult conditions early on. And really, I tell people kids are being overwhelmed, academics, extracurriculars, expectations, and the only way to really build capacity is to give them more time for rest and sleep, more time for play, energy-dense foods, all these things. So hopefully we can really rethink the parenting scheme here. And finally, I tell people, this is me strapped to all these devices, but really my grandmother had the ultimate app. She knew when to go outdoors, when to get sunshine, when to walk, to bend, to squat. These are ingrained into our DNA. So really our natural intuition is the greatest app we have. So as much as I talk about apps, sometimes take off the Fitbit, take off the devices, go out in nature and follow your own body's signals because they are designed to make you healthy and well. So with that, these are some of my resources. I blog at culturalhealthsolutions.com. It's been an absolute honor to talk to you. We'll be available for questions afterward. Thanks so much for having me.